I'll touch on solar a little bit from time to time, and you're more than welcome to ask me questions in the Q&A. But our experience has been largely in the wind space, so I will try and focus a little bit more on that in this presentation. Till say this year or maybe late last year, the situation was that the majority of the wind capacity expansion that you saw in India was very much on balance sheet. There were a few IPPs, CLP being probably the most well-known of the lot, but a few others as well. But for the most part, the average person who invested in wind was a depreciation customer. What that also meant, obviously, is that they were not looking for limited recourse financing, because these guys were deploying spare cash to get a tax benefit. Most of these projects were small. If you speak to most of those investors, they had 1 turbine, 3 turbines, 5, 10, that sort of thing. And they weren't, it just didn't justify the cost and the complexity of project financing. Most of them were pretty happy to be balance sheeting this or using corporate guarantees. They also had obviously strong domestic relationships with their house banks, and were obviously more comfortable, rightly so, with using them for these relatively small investments. And there was also the issue of eligibility for international financing, in that these didn't tick all the boxes that international banks will want to see. On the next slide, I will comment a little bit about what those boxes are. Now, going forward, one of the biggest concerns, and if you sort of walked around, the coffee area, the most talked about subject, I think, was one of high cost of financing or debt financing. It seems to be on everybody's mind, rightly so. And I think that is driving people to think a little bit more about maybe we should be looking at international finance. Is there a cost arbitrage there? There is also the issue of interest rate uncertainty. Domestic Indian rupee financing inherently cannot be hedged. You are stuck with the base rate risk. A lot of Indian promoters are comfortable with that. International ones tend to be very, very uncomfortable, because they're used to having a long swap market. But with the renewable energy project, especially one where you have a PPA price locked in for the next 15 or 20 years, to have an interest rate that can move sometimes quite drastically is something that rightly provides a lot of concern and sleepless nights to developers. There are a growing number of IPPs, which automatically creates a need for non-recourse financing. And then there are also an increasing number of qualified investors. So, the domestic and international companies who approach us that we speak to today understand what limited recourse financing is. In the past, when you spoke about limited recourse financing, the simplistic understanding of that was, well, that's just financing without a guarantee, isn't it? Well, it's not. It means that there's a lot more discipline in the kind of contracts that you put together, in the way risk is allocated, in the kind of due diligence that takes place. Because in a limited recourse financing situation, banks are sharing risk with you. They take the same risks in some sense that the equity holder does, or many of the same risks that the equity holder does. So, have to be incentivized appropriately and be properly educated about what those risks are. There are also an increasing number of contractors who are prepared to provide bankable EPC arrangements. That's critical. I think a lot of people don't understand that just a turbine supply contract, an EPC contract, it's not one and the same thing. They are, there are massive issues in terms of risk allocation from a lender's perspective that are important in a limited recourse scenario. Less relevant, or perhaps even irrelevant in a balance sheet scenario. And I think a lot of the suppliers were not used to having to deal with these issues, because they were dealing with a client who bought one turbine, and you just put across your standard contract, maybe negotiated 2 or 3 clauses, mainly commercial, and then got on with it. That, I think we've now got, especially in the wind space, you've got names like Vestas and Gamesa and General Electric, who fully understand how limited recourse financing works, and why lenders need certain things in contracts. There is obviously regulatory encouragement. I think on the wind side, GBI is brilliant. Unfortunately, as of right now, it still doesn't compensate for what you lose out in accelerated depreciation benefits, but it's something. It's a positive step. There are some states that have different tariffs for projects that don't take accelerated depreciation. I think that's great. There's also RPOs, which helps, at least from a soft perspective, in knowing that the utility will sign your PPA when the time comes. Solar, obviously, everybody knows about the National Solar Mission and specific solar RPOs that everybody's trying to put together and make sure provide the assurance that developers and lenders will need. As a result, there is an increasing demand for international project financing. At least that's what we're seeing. Let me focus a little bit on case studies and what we have done, or what other international lenders as well have done in the Indian market. There are two projects that I've put up there that are closed, largely disbursed. So this is not a hypothetical situation. This is real money that banks have put out on a non-recourse basis. So this is real project financing. There are no corporate guarantees in these deals. The first one was a 50 megawatt project that we did in Maharashtra. It was the first in our, at least to the best of our knowledge, project finance deal that was done in India in the renewable energy sector. We successfully syndicated it to 4 other international lenders, and so it was quite a milestone in the Indian context. Subsequently, and earlier this year, we did a 90 megawatt project in Gujarat. This project was perhaps taking it one step further in that we managed to get an export credit agency involved in the transaction. The main advantage of having the export credit agency in the deal was that we could get a much longer tenor. So we managed to stretch it out to 15 years, which is normally very, very hard to find. I'd say possibly even impossible in the ECB market. So we managed to get a very long tenor. We managed to get a deal on that transaction which was very attractive to the sponsor because we could get the rate down to a very, very attractive level. And it is also a fixed rate, because when you take foreign currency financing and you swap it into rupees, it is a true fixed rate. And given where rupee rates have gone subsequently over the last few months, that deal is now looking extremely attractive because there is no scope for the pricing on that deal to change. They have locked in a rate, and that rate will stay for the next 15 years. And that's a huge advantage in a situation where rates are where they are today. Let's focus a little bit on what those two projects had that allowed them to tap the international market. Both of them had top quality international sponsors. Not only were they top quality sponsors in their own right, but they had a track record in the power and utility space. So they had proven their commitment to the sector, and they had proven their understanding of the sector. We obviously want to make sure this is a 15-year relationship in some cases. On a particular project, we want to make sure that the people we are banking have the ability not only to put this project together, but if things go wrong, as they often do, we'll have the ability to sort out whatever is done. We are bankers, we're not engineers, we're not project developers. If there's a problem with interconnection, if there's a problem with EPC contracts, if there's bad weather on the site, really we will not know what to do. So we want to make sure that the person on the other side knows exactly what to do, has the right experience in India, overseas, wherever. That's important. The lender's due diligence was done by top quality advisors. And when I say lender's due diligence, there's technical, there's legal, there's tax, there's market, there's model audit, there's all kinds of things which a lot of sponsors say, well, why are we spending this money? Is it worth it? Is it really required? But to get the international project finance community interested in a project, I think these just have to be done. That's the way the ship sails. You just have no choice. These sponsors were comfortable with that. They allowed us to do that due diligence, and as a result, we were able to get our committees comfortable with this. The documentation was up to international standards. Again, very important from our perspective. We use English law for these documents. They're sort of much thicker than what you might see in the domestic market, but they provide the kind of risk allocation that international lenders look for. And these projects also had currency and interest rate risks fully hedged. I mentioned how that's possible with international financing, and we actually did this for both those projects. We have done others. We recently did a refinancing for another ECB loan to a wind power project. But these are the two sort of greenfield projects that we've done in recent times. I'll take a second to go through where we think things need to be going forward. Not sure that any regulators in the room, but we think that it's important that regulators strictly enforce RPOs. We'd love to see proof of that. We think tariff structures are extremely important. As I mentioned, even today there's much more juice in a wind deal which takes accelerated depreciation. We would love to see a situation where it's even, so that IPP developers are able to compete for the best sites and able to get contract prices that make sense from the suppliers. We'd love to see improved PPAs. Those that are developed with lender consultation. Nobody has ever asked me what I thought of a PPA. And that's fine, but I would hope that regulators are speaking to at least the large local banks, the SBIs and the ICICs of the world, to make sure that the PPAs that are being developed and put out there are documents that these entities at least are prepared to bank. From a lender's perspective, as I said, we talk to international lenders day in and day out because we need to syndicate our deals to other banks. And one of the big issues that we have is that lenders say SCB risk is bad or is not creditworthy, and ultimately these projects rely on SCBs. We can't possibly take this risk. The way we've gotten around it is to look at payment record versus just looking at a balance sheet. Let's face it, if you look at the balance sheet, I don't think any of the SCBs would really sort of inspire a massive amount of confidence. However, if you look at the payment record of some states, whatever their financial condition may be, if you look at the payment record, some of them pay very promptly, and they've been paying very promptly for a long time. We've managed to take the view that we should be banking projects in those states, because as long as the developer gets paid, as long as the project gets paid, we will get our money back. And so we've focused on that, and we think that other international lenders looking at India should be doing the same. Which means obviously that you will not finance projects in every state, but that's fine. We also think that, at least on the wind side, lenders will, they need to accept the PPA as it is right now. I'm not sure that there are going to be major improvements in the wind PPA. And at the end of the day, if you look back, we've had a massive, long history with wind, and there have not been, at least to my knowledge, any major defaults or SEBs looking to wiggle their way out of commitments made under a PPA, even if those PPAs are not perfect documents. The development process should follow international standards, especially in terms of land acquisition and data collection. Most international banks are signatories to Equator Principles, and we follow World Bank IFC guidelines. We often have developers come and say to us, but the turbine supplier bought this land. We don't know how they decided the right price for the land. We don't know how they handled sort of relocation issues or whatever community consultation issues that need to be done. That's not good enough. I think people need to, if you're looking to tap the international market, I think you will need to be involved in that process, or at the very least ensure that process was done in a manner that complies with these requirements, whether or not you think those requirements make sense. They exist, and they need to be followed. Last but not least, the structure needs to be bankable. I've had some pretty surreal conversations with people who said, well, when we put in the bid, we assumed 80-20. You didn't ask before you did that. It's not a lender's fault that you went in with an assumption that perhaps lenders are uncomfortable with. So I think it's critical that debt sizing expectations are reasonable, but are done in consultation with lenders to see what lenders are comfortable with, and not just a lender. If you find a lender who's uncomfortable with what you're proposing, talk to 2 or 3, figure out if everybody's telling you that it doesn't make sense or they're uncomfortable with it. There must be some some credibility in that. So you might want to take that on board. Risk allocation, I think, is a critical thing, especially in a non-recourse scenario. This should be compliant with international precedents. I don't disagree that in some situations a short-term, 1-year rolling PPA makes more sense. It does. It absolutely does in some situations. Having said that, you've got to remember that international banks have a global balance sheet or international balance sheet that they can deploy in a variety of different countries. They are not only stuck here. And they will deploy it in the place where they are most likely to get repaid. If the profile or if the risk profile that you're asking them to take is going to double or triple or quadruple equity returns, but substantially or deteriorates their likelihood of getting repaid, banks are not going to be excited. You've got to remember, from a bank's perspective, it's pretty binary. Either you're going to get repaid or you're not. There's no IPO at the end of it. There's no massive expansion. There's no huge upside over here. Either we get repaid with our interest or we don't. And an equity holder has a much greater incentive to see higher returns, even at higher risk. There is nothing wrong with that. For a lot of projects, a short-term PPA makes sense. However, if you are going down that route, you need to adjust your debt expectations accordingly. You need to adjust your expectations of what the banks will do in terms of leverage or what the banks will do in terms of cost accordingly. You are going to make a lot more money as a result, perhaps. it can't just be that the banks are stuck in the same place. It's not only about pricing, it is also about whether or not they're prepared to take that risk, whether they want you to show higher skin in the game with higher equity. So it's critical. It's critical that the incentives are aligned and that people are fully on the same page in terms of what each one is looking to get out of the project. Last but not least, I mentioned ECS briefly. If you can put together a project where an export credit agency can be involved, it makes a huge difference to the bankability of the project because they bring in tenor, lower cost, and vast amounts of additional liquidity. I think I'm going to wrap up at this point so that we conserve some time for question and